Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns in their Week 17 matchup played January 3rd, 2016. We're going to go over every possession and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis as these AFC North Division rivals went at it, and the Steelers pretty much own the Browns. And they needed to win this game, coupled with the Jets' loss, to get into the postseason. And things didn't start off good for Pittsburgh, as they would end up with a fumble on their first possession when on 2nd and 9 from the 34. Antonio Brown, after catching the ball from Roethlisberger, got hit by Dansby. He forced the fumble, and Robertson recovered. So now the Browns would take over, and they had Austin Davis under center, so he got the start over Johnny Manziel. And the Browns started off on the Pittsburgh 39, but they would go for it on 4th and 5 from the 34, and they were a yard shy as Davis went to Barnridge. He picked up 4, but it was a turnover on downs. So the turnover doesn't result in any points, and now the Steelers would take back over on their own 30 after the turnover on downs, and they would drive the ball downfield. They got all the way down into the red zone, all the way down to the 2-yard line. Roethlisberger went to Heath Miller for the touchdown, the 2-yard pass, and now Boswell added the extra point, and it was 7-0 Steelers over the Browns. Cleveland would end up punting after 5 plays on their next possession, and now the Steelers would get the ball on their own 29, and they would turn it over for the second time here in the first quarter as Roethlisberger was intercepted by Poyer, and now Cleveland would have it on the Pittsburgh 24. They got down to the 9, but they got pushed back to the 11, and that's where their drive would stall, and Travis Coons would come out to kick a 29-yard field goal. It was good, and that put the first points on the board for Cleveland, with the score now Pittsburgh 7, Cleveland 3, with about a minute left still in the first. So now Pittsburgh would take over, and they would bring the first quarter to a close. They would open up the second. They would get into Cleveland territory. They got all the way down to the 30. That's where their drive would stall. And out came Boswell to attempt a 48-yard field goal, but it was no good. So it remained 7-3 with now about 12 and a half minutes left before halftime. Cleveland would end up punting after 6 plays on their next possession, and then the Steelers were held to a 3-and-out on the possession that followed as they would punt it back to the Browns. The Browns would take over at midfield on their own 48, but they quickly got into Pittsburgh territory, and they would bring the ball down to the 11-yard line, but on 3rd and 10 from the 11, Austin Davis was sacked by Blake, and that brought the game to the 2-minute warning, and coming out of the 2-minute warning, Cleveland was forced to attempt a 39-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, as Travis Coons now brought the game to within 1 point with the score Pittsburgh 7, Cleveland 6, with just under 2 minutes left before halftime. Pittsburgh would take over on their own 20 after the touchback on the kickoff, and on 2nd and 10 from the 20, Roethlisberger went to Wheaton. He picked up 40 yards and a first down at the Cleveland 40. Then on 2nd and 5 from the 35, Roethlisberger went to Brown. He picked up 18 yards, and now was a first down in the red zone at the 17. And on 2nd and 10 from the 17, Ben Roethlisberger went to Antonio Brown for the 17-yard touchdown. Boswell added the extra point, and it was now 14-6, Pittsburgh over Cleveland with less than a minute left before halftime. But the Browns would put together a scoring drive here with less than a minute left. They started on their own 20. They quickly would move it into Pittsburgh territory, but then Davis was sacked on 2nd and 10 from the 48 by Moats. That pushed him back into Cleveland territory at the 43, but on 3rd and 19, Austin Davis went to Terrell Pryor. He picked up 42 yards and a first down in the red zone at the 15, but then 3 incomplete passes would bring out Travis Coons to kick his 3rd field goal of the game. This one from 33 yards out, and it was good, and that made it a 5-point game with the score 14-9 as this game went to halftime with the Steelers slightly ahead. So the Browns would get the ball first in the second half. They would go 3-and-out on their first possession. So now the Steelers would take over on their own 38 after the punt, and on 2nd and 8 from the 40, Roethlisberger was picked off by Robertson. Robertson had recovered a fumble earlier, and now he picks off Roethlisberger's second interception of the game. but Cleveland would again fail to turn it into any points, although they would start with the ball on the Pittsburgh 9 with first and goal, but on third and goal from the 5, Austin Davis was intercepted by James Harrison, and so now the Steelers would take over. So off of the 3 turnovers thus far by Pittsburgh, the Browns had only mustered 3 points, and so the Steelers now would take over on their own 5-yard line after the interception by Harrison. They were faced with a 3rd and 7 from the 8, but a penalty for offsides made it a 3rd and 2. Roethlisberger then went to Darius Hayward-Bay, and he picked up 66 yards and a first down on the edge of the red zone at the Cleveland 21. That was as far as they would get, though, as Boswell would come out on 4th down from the 21 to attempt a 39-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now 17-9 as the Steelers would extend their lead to 8 with about 9.5 minutes still left in the third. So now Pittsburgh would kick the ball off to the Browns. They would take over on the 27 after the kickoff, and they would put together a huge drive as they would eat up almost 10 minutes of game clock as they would end up bringing the third quarter to a close. As they had got down into the red zone, they got pushed back out the red zone, then they got back into the red zone, and the final play of the third quarter was a run for no gain on a 2nd and 6 from the 11, and so the fourth quarter would start off in an incomplete pass, and then the second play of the fourth quarter would see Travis Coons come out to attempt a 29-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and with that field goal, it was a 5-point game with the score Pittsburgh 17, Cleveland 12, with still about 15 minutes left on the clock as less than 10 seconds had been taken off the clock by the Browns here in the fourth. Now the Steelers would take over, and they would punt, though, after 5 plays on their next possession, and the Browns would get the ball on their own 1-yard line after the punt as they were backed up, and they ended up actually getting a couple of penalties as they were like on the quarter-yard line. But on 2nd and 10 from the 21, after a 20-yard pass on first down after a couple penalties, brought him out to the 21, and an incomplete pass, and now a 2nd and 10 from the 21. Austin Davis was sacked by Timmons. Timmons forces the fumble. It's recovered by Moats, and now Pittsburgh would take over on the Cleveland 8-yard line. First and goal, Roethlisberger to Marcus Wheaton, touchdown. They would go for 2, and it was successful as Roethlisberger hit Toussaint, who had come into the game in replace of an injured D'Angelo Williams earlier on. So now, with that touchdown, it was 25-12, Pittsburgh in the lead as they extended their lead to 13 over Cleveland. So the Pittsburgh Steelers right there coming up big time as the Browns had a chance to get back in it, but now is again a 2-score game. And on the kickoff, it was a fumble by the Browns, and Pittsburgh would recover. Boykin recovers the fumble on the kickoff, and so now Pittsburgh would get it right back in Cleveland territory at the 28. They would end up getting down into the red zone all the way down to the 3-yard line, but their drive stalled there, and Boswell would come out to attempt a 21-yard field goal. It was good, and it was now 28-12 with about 8 minutes left to play in this game. So now the Browns would take over after the kickoff on their own 22, and they did get into Pittsburgh territory, and on 3rd and 1, a penalty against the Browns would push them back to a 3rd and 6 from the Pittsburgh 38, and Austin Davis was sacked by Tuitt for an 8-yard loss. That made it 4th and 14 from the 46, and the Browns would go for it as there was only about 4.5 minutes left in the game, and William Gay intercepts Austin Davis and gets the ball back for the Steelers. Pittsburgh would go 3 and out on the possession that followed, and now Cleveland would take over one last time with about 2 minutes left, and they would end up bringing the ball up towards midfield as they got it up to the 40, and they went for it on 4th and 5, and they were 2 yards shy of the first down, so they turned the ball over on downs, and now Pittsburgh would take over, and all that was left to do was for Roethlisberger to take 2 knees in the victory formation as the Pittsburgh Steelers win this one 28-12, and they make it into the playoffs. The Steelers are headed for the playoffs. They're 10-6 on the season, 4-4 on the road, and the Jets losing to Buffalo, and with the win by Pittsburgh, the Steelers are in the playoffs. And the Cleveland Browns are 13-3 on the season, 2-6 at home. And the early word is that they're firing Pettin and also their GM Farmer. And I'll tell you what, those guys definitely deserve to be fired because they did not do quite a good job at all by any stretch of the imagination. They should have stuck with Shadzinski a couple years ago, but instead they bring in Pettin, and he screwed the pooch, as the saying goes. As the Browns a couple years ago were a team that was on the verge of actually turning into a playoff team, but instead they've just been totally inadequate, just a mess, and they continue to just go down, and just 13-3, and even with all the quarterback controversy and all that mess. But Pittsburgh, they get it together, and just when it looked like the Steelers were out of the playoffs, they get back in. So the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up big in this game to get the win. Of course, with the Jets losing the game against the Bills, Pittsburgh in the playoffs. Ben Roethlisberger in this game, 24 for 36, 349 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Like I said, with the turnovers early on, those struggles by the Steelers, but the Browns could only turn it into 3 points on the scoreboard. And by not being able to turn those turnovers into points, they weren't able to capitalize on the opportunities, whereas the Steelers, when they were given the opportunities, they took care of business. But their running game sure did get hurt, as D'Angelo Williams ended up with just 8 yards off of 5 carries before leaving the game. He also had 2 catches for 13 yards in this game as well. But D'Angelo Williams hurts his ankle, and so now it's a big question mark for the backfield. But Toussaint finished the game with 12 carries for 24 yards. And for Antonio Brown, 13 catches, 187 yards, and a touchdown, as he was killing it in this game. Darius Hayward-Bay, 2 catches for 74 yards, and Marcus Wheaton, 3 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown. Heath Miller, 3 catches, 18 yards, and a touchdown as well. Austin Davis, 24 for 46, 240 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Isaiah Crowell had 15 carries for 53 yards in this game. Duke Johnson Jr. had 4 carries for 11 yards and 4 catches for 34 yards, giving him 45 total yards in the game. Gary Barnidge, 8 catches for 66 yards, and Travis Benjamin, 5 catches for 53 yards. Davis also had 22 yards off of 3 carries for Austin Davis. We look at the kickers in this game. Chris Boswell, 2 for 3 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. Travis Coons, 4 for 4 on the field goals, as he was perfect in the game but did not attempt an extra point, as they never got into the end zone, as it was all Travis Coons. His 4 field goals were the only scores for the Cleveland Browns. We look at the defense for Pittsburgh. Allen had a sack. Timmons had 1.5 sacks. Moats had a sack. Blake had a sack. Tuitt had 2 sacks. And Ryan Shazier had a half a sack. William Gay had an interception, and James Harrison also had an interception. Boykin had a forced fumble, and Timmons also had a forced fumble as well. And for Cleveland on defense, Poyer, Robertson, they each had interceptions and a forced fumble by Carlos Dansby. Then we look at the team stats. 22 first downs for Cleveland, just 16 first downs for Pittsburgh. On third down, the Browns 4 for 16, 25%. Pittsburgh just 2 for 8, 25% as well on third down. The Browns went for it 4 times on fourth down, turned it over 3 times, and converted once for 25% on third down. Total net yards, 379 for the Steelers, 263 for the Browns. And on the ground, the Browns netted 86 rushing yards, just 30 yards netted for the Steelers, as they averaged just 1.6 yards per rushing play. So they got their run shut down, but Ben Roethlisberger lifting them to victory despite the interceptions, as they ended up with 349 net passing yards to just 177 net passing yards for Cleveland, as Davis was sacked 7 times, losing 63 yards off of those 7 sacks as the defense steps it up big time for Pittsburgh in this game. And as for the penalties, 9 penalties against the Steelers for 45 yards, 8 penalties against the Browns for 47 penalty yards. The Steelers had a fumble which they lost. The Browns fumbled it 3 times. They recovered 1 and lost 2. And in the red zone in this game, Pittsburgh 3 for 4, 75% in the red zone. And for the Browns, they were 0 for 5 in the red zone. So the Steelers defense coming up huge in the red zone. And then time of possession, 33 minutes, 57 seconds for the Browns, 26 minutes and 3 seconds for the Steelers. But the defense for Pittsburgh coming up big, and they're going to need their defense to continue to play at that level if they're going to get any wins in the postseason, is they're going to have to rely on their passing game, as there's a big question mark in the backfield for Pittsburgh moving forward. But for now, they're in the postseason, and they're a dangerous team as Roethlisberger can put up some numbers and he can get them into the end zone. And with the way their defense is playing in this game, forcing those turnovers and getting after the quarterback, if they can continue to do that, then they are definitely a threat moving forward in the postseason. It'll be interesting to see what happens come wild card weekend next week. Definitely cannot wait for that. But here in this game, they had some troubles early on. They were turning it over, but their defense, they stood fast and they stood tall and they were strong and they came up big time as they were forcing those turnovers, forcing the turnovers on downs and stopping the Browns from getting into the end zone as they shut them out of the end zone and only allowed those 4 field goals by Coons. So big performance by the defense, and Roethlisberger bouncing back after those interceptions to lead the Steelers to victory into the postseason. As Mike Tomlin does another amazing job in 2015 and getting the Steelers into the playoffs, a team that a lot of people didn't think were going to be able to make it this year, especially with the youth on the defensive end. We saw in this game, they really dominated Cleveland anyway. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.